You're live again.
We had a little technical difficulty there. I'm sorry about that. So really, I guess we really should go back to the beginning, Bill, where we were talking about you getting your start riding bikes and your dad helping out and stuff like that with the Saxes and the Hodakas.
I started on a Ace 90 and moved up to a 100 Sax, which at the time was, they didn't have 125s yet, so that was a big deal. First bike I ever owned that really handled well, and so it was a great time in racing. And I started riding, after that I started riding the Husqvarna for Gene's Automotive in Loomis here in the Sacramento area. And he had Pentons, and I started riding the Pentons and the Huskies and got sponsored by both of them at one time. And they helped me in my career. And I rode Huskies and Pentons until probably late, oh no, I guess it was early 70s, probably 72, 73. And then, well, actually I was riding Pentons in 74 actually even. And then after that I had a shop and got involved in sales of motorcycles at Kawasaki dealership, and we were selling KTMs because John Penton had been bought out by that time. Penton, or KTM kind of forced John out, John Penton. And that's where I first got hooked up with Danny, actually, after a full sponsored ride.
That's what I wanted to talk about too. If the video was cut off in the beginning, so we weren't really sure whether you had heard that it was Bill DaPrato, who was a mentor and a lifelong friend of Danny Magoo Chandler's, and that's why we're up here in Sacramento today to learn more about Bill, and of course more about this beautiful replica that he's built in the memory of Danny Magoo Chandler. Now, Bill, tell us a little bit more about this bike, because we're here, and when you see the 42, when you see a Mako, and you're in the Sacramento area, how can you say it? The feeling that Danny Magoo was here, and the whole Hangtown scene, and all of that, it's so memorable for so many people. Tell us about this bike, why you built it, and then we'll ask you some more questions about how it all came together.
Well, I had Danny call me one day and said, I've got this old Mako, I want you to put it together for me because I want to put it in the Hall of Fame, because he didn't want to put a Honda in there. He was pretty adamant about that. So he got this bike from back east somewhere. I don't know where he found it. It was pretty much a basket case, and it was the right era. So he got it to me, and we started putting it together. I got help from several of my friends in the Northern California area, but it came together, and it took me about 4 years to accumulate all the parts.
See, I wasn't even aware that Dan was a part of this bike going back together. I remembered hearing conversation about it from you and maybe some from other people, that you were building a replica, but I didn't know it was Danny who actually had found the bike, and then you began to do the restoration. Let me ask you this: how authentic is the bike to the bike that Danny rode that year? I'll hold the mic. It's okay.
It's very authentic. We had factory Fox forks on it. We had the CRF swing arm, the aluminum swing arm, and the Fox shocks. Obviously, we had a lot of extensive motor work done. The Fox forks that we actually had on our bike were handmade by Fox. They weren't production forks like these are. But if you look at old photos of Danny, you can see that he had the Fox forks on there. They were just, handmade. They weren't cast like these.
Right.
But other than that, it's very authentic. Everything that you see is pretty much the way we ran it in '79.
Now, one of the questions that always came to mind, even back in the day when we would see pictures of it in magazines and things of that nature, and I've heard stories like this from Brad Lackey too, that Suzuki wasn't happy that he had upside-down forks, or that he had something similar to a Yamaha boost box, or whatever they called it. When you saw this bike out there, you saw it had the aluminum swing arm and the Fox shocks. How did the bigwigs at Mako feel about you doing that?
They weren't thrilled.
They weren't?
That was pretty much our demise in the end. They flew us to LA, and we had a big discussion about, they wanted to see more OEM parts on the bike, and at the time it just wasn't competitive with the stock equipment. And so we were trying to do everything we could to make it as competitive as possible.
So was it you who determined what would be on the bike and if it worked better, and you get the feedback from Danny and then keep it, or how was what was the research and development like?
No, that's exactly it. We would test products. We would get people all the time offering us products, Fox forks, things of these nature, and we would go out and test them and make sure that they were worth putting on the bike. I mean, we wouldn't just put anything on there. We would make sure it was, it would help us and improve his speed and reliability.
Right. So let me ask you this: you were with Danny for 2 years as a Mako mechanic, 79 and 80.
We were actually together more than that, but 78 we won the Golden State Series on a privateer Mako that we were riding for Jim Moore, who owned Pro Track Trailers. And I was working for his son, Bobby Moore, and Jim had this bike available. He had a falling out with his rider, and so he asked me if I had a rider that would, sit in, and I said, absolutely. So I called Danny because he'd been riding for my shop previous to that, riding KTMs for my shop in Woodland. And so...
what was the name of that shop, your shop back in Woodland?
Woodland Sports Center. And Danny rode for my shop for, I guess, probably 75, 6, and 7, probably at least 3 years.
Right.
And then, so Jim had this Mako and asked me if I knew anyone who wanted to ride it, and I said absolutely. So I gave Dan a call, and he was thrilled. And we went on and won Golden State Series on it, and then Mako offered us a ride, and actually KTM offered us a ride also. And so it came down to what Danny wanted. I told him, I've worked on them both. I like them both. I can make them both fast and make them both handle well. So it's really your call.
So let me ask you this, because so many guys today, of course, in the vintage scene, do ride.
You're back on.
We're back live?
Yes, my apologies.
Not a
Again,
problem.
Yeah.
So my question to you, Bill, was so many guys in the vintage scene today ride Makos, and the maintenance is a little bit different with a Mako, but then again, it's like that with Ferraris or a lot of your European things. What was a weekly regimen like for you and Danny, say, after one race at the Golden State? What would you do to this bike to maintain it and keep it reliable for the next race?
Well, during the Golden State, I was working for Bobby Moore also. That was Jim Moore's son. So I was doing his bikes. He was riding minis at the time. So I was doing his bikes, and I was doing Danny's Makos. And at that time, during Golden State, I wasn't tearing them down completely, but I would go through them pretty thoroughly.
Did you tear them down a lot more after you guys hit the Trans Am Series or the National Series? Yeah. What did you do there week to week? Absolutely.
When we were doing Nationals, I would tear the bike down we'd completely strip it down every week. We'd pull the motor apart. I should say. I'd pull the motor apart. Just look at the tranny, make sure everything was good. There was no problems. Freshen up the top end if it needed it. But basically just go through the whole motor and make sure everything was sound.
Sorry about that. Danny was quite tough on equipment. We know him that he would ring a bike out, rev it to the moon, and if he kept it upright, well, he'd finish a race thanks to your mechanical expertise. Was there anything internally on the motor? I remember discussing it with you one time because we've had so many talks about Danny when I've been up in this area, where you said other than maybe some little wallowing in the cases.
Try to get the thing to rev more and to get some RPMs out of the thing and really just get it spinning.
And what about carburation? I mean, you've got the Bing on this one. Makos always seem to run best with Bings on them. Was there any little tricks that you did or anything that you did to make the bike perform better with the Bing?
Yeah, actually, Bings make a lot of horsepower. They really are good carburetors. The key to making a Bing work is having the right slides and the right cutaways on the slides, which is a trick I learned years ago with the KTMs. So I had a box of different slides and, of course, needle jets and pilot jets and needles and, all the normal jetting. But the slides and the
factory supporting or not supporting you at that time?
Well, when we were running the Nationals, we were running the 250. And then we ran the Trans Am, we were riding support class, and we were riding in the open class. So he rode an open bike, and he rode a 250. Truthfully, in my heart of hearts, I thought the open bike was a more competitive bike. It had so much power that, you didn't have to do as much to the motor to get it to be competitive. The 250 was a little different. You had to really work on it to get it to run with Bob Hanna's Yamaha or
anybody else that was out there.
Marty Tripes was riding Honda then, and
Sure.
so there was some fast bikes out there.
Now, from what I understand, this bike will be going to the AMA Museum in Ohio in the very near future. Were you approached to have that bike sent there? How long will it be there? How did all that happen?
That actually happened through Danny. Danny was the one that set that up with the AMA, and then he called me and said, hey, you know, I really want you to put the Mako back together for me. Can you do it? And I said, sure, I'd be thrilled. So then he got the basket case Mako for me, and we started from there. And then we just started accumulating parts. It took me quite a while, and I got some help from local guys here in town. Dave Coupe is a good friend, and Todd Ballard, and you know, even Bradley helped me a little bit with some stuff. So it was a 4-year effort to get all the parts together, and then to actually put the bike together only took me a day or two. But
Sure.
it's just getting the parts.
It's getting the parts and making sure they're authentic and they look the way they did back when Dan rode the bike. Well, you know, speaking of the bike and all it represented and how it's going to be at the AMA Museum for a couple of years, I know a lot of people would prefer we could get the camera to go around the bike, but we just don't have that capability. So what I'm going to do after we're finished with Billy a little bit later, I'm going to take some pictures close up of the bike. If you have any questions, you could always send them to us and I can get them to Bill, and you can get a closer look at how beautiful this Mako is. But what I'd like to do now, Bill, is really go back in time a bit to when you first met Danny, and where you met him and what he was like. Because in the back of my mind, we all see Dan in video and all these amazing pictures that he had, but when do you know a guy like that has that talent and he's going to start to go places? What did you see when you met him, and how did that all progress?
I first met Big Dan, Danny's dad, at Mammoth Bar, which is a local place here in it's actually in Forest Hill area, Auburn area. And I was riding down there, and I was a local expert, and I was buzzing around, and Big Dan saw me and came over when I stopped to rest for a little bit, and came over and started chatting with me and said, I'd really like for you to meet my son. And so I met Danny. He was riding minis at the time. And
What year was this?
Oh, I'd like to say it was probably around 71, somewhere in there, 70, 71.
Okay.
And then we started a relationship, Danny and I did. We rode together a little bit. You know, he was still riding minis. And I'd go to his house up there. He lived at Idle Wheels Trailer Park in Forest Hill. And we'd go up there for the weekend and ride and hang out. And that's how we started our relationship.
Now, I understand Big Dan, Dan's father, had nicknames for everyone. That's how Magoo got his name. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he called one daughter Red and one daughter Blackie. And nobody seemed to really have a real name. Did he have any nicknames for you?
No, he never called me anything other than Bill. But yeah, he had, his wife was Big Red, and then his oldest daughter was Little Red, and then Danny was Magoo, and then his little sister was Blackie. And Big Dan was a character. He really was.
Did he have one leg?
He only had one leg, and there's lots of stories about Dan. He rode some enduros back in the day, and he would come in with his leg all twisted around and half fallen off, and of course the girls would look at him like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And they'd all freak out. But you know, Dan was a character. He was a good man.
Well, let's move up a little bit to see. There's so many questions because, and I can't really bring them all in chronological order because I know Billy pretty well, and over the years we've discussed Danny and different things that have happened so many different times, and sometimes wine is involved in those conversations. So you're not really sure if you've asked those questions or not. So it might not be in chronological order, but I'm going to ask Bill some questions about the KTM Mako thing. I think there was one year where there was actually a little bit of a bidding war going on for Danny at that time. What year was that, and how did that all get to be?
That was the end of '78 after we won Golden State, because he had ridden KTMs for my shop prior, and they were helping me through my shop and supporting Danny. And then when I closed my shop in '77, I went to work for Jim Moore and working for Bobby Moore and did some other stuff. And then when he won the Golden State Series on the Mako, the Pro Track Trailers Mako, then that's when KTM offered us a deal and Mako offered us a deal also. And they were both great bikes. Like I said earlier, they're at that time they were both great bikes. I couldn't have cared less which one we took. And I told Danny, it's completely your decision, whatever you're comfortable on. And he loved them both. I mean, he was very fast on the KTM. So I think we stayed with the Mako because we felt that at that time he was really getting dialed in on the Mako, and we felt like we were going to get factory support, which is what they promised us, which really didn't materialize, but that's what we were promised, and so that's why we went, I think, with them. That was our final decision.
Well, let me also, you say you didn't get the factory support, and I've heard that from other factory riders as well, that how come that guy has that part, but we have this? And I guess that's why it kind of evolved into aluminum swing arms and you making those changes to make that bike competitive. On other bikes, well, you were his mechanic for just KTM and for Mako.
Correct.
Right. So what about his practice regimen? I often wondered that, and I'm sure other people did too. Was he a very dedicated guy as far as training goes, or was he just all out the day of the race and the rest of the week? What was it like? So we were talking about how really consistent Danny was compared to things you read about in magazines, and we know there's so much information out there between Facebook and blogs, and so many people have memories that, well, they weren't really there, and they write things that aren't really accurate. So tell us a little bit more about some of the things you read and what you really know about it.
Oh, God. That's a loaded question. About his writing abilities,
Yeah.
you mean? He was truly one of the more naturally talented writers. I mean, he had the ability, for sure. It was just getting him in conditioning and getting his mind straight. Danny was the kind of writer that, he wanted to go all out from the very beginning. And, it took me a long time just beating on him to try to get him to understand that you don't win the race in the first lap. You gotta be there at the end. And, he had all the talent in the world, but it just took a while for him to mature. And sadly, he was, I feel like he was really in his prime years when he got hurt.
Yeah. You mentioned that to me, that the conversations you had with him about training, learning to pace himself, being maybe a little bit easier on the equipment, was really just starting to come into play right maybe during those Honda years and in 1984, I guess it was, before he had gone to Kawasaki.
He's riding KTMs too. He was riding for KTM in Europe at that time. And you could see it in his style. He was definitely starting to calm down, smooth out. He was still very fast, but he was not that wild kid that he was earlier on. He was maturing. He was becoming a much more polished rider.
Well, I've never read it anywhere. I don't think anybody's ever asked you about it, but I'm going to ask you about it because you knew him for so long. And he was such a good friend of yours, and you were like a mentor to him. And you told me earlier, you went from being his friend to his mentor, and then he started to treat you like a parent. He became like this little spoiled kid running around telling you how it's going to be. That fateful night in Paris when he had his crash and was paralyzed, where were you? When did you hear about it? Emotionally, where were you when that happened?
I was here in the States. We had talked about, I was actually supposed to go back to work for him. And so he had to go over there and ride 3 races to fulfill his contract. And then we were going to get ready for the World Championships. And we were to be stationed and based in Italy for M. Roberts Clothing Company.
And you would have been with him there in Italy
Yeah.
to chase the World Championship?
Yeah, that was what we had just negotiated earlier that year at Carlsbad. He flew me out to Carlsbad and we discussed everything. And it was pretty much a done deal. We were just getting ready to go when he got home and start getting everything ready. And I have a family in Italy, so it would have been great. Would have been an ideal situation.
That would have been for Mako or for
Kawasaki.
that would have been for Kawasaki at that time. Right. So you have family in Italy and you're all set up there
And I got the call that he got hurt, broke his neck, and it didn't look good. He was paralyzed, and they're doing their best to try to get him home. And so then that took a while to get him home. And then finally he was in San Jose, and I would go see him all the time. I'd go see him on the weekends and stuff. And it was tough. It was a tough time for him and Tracy.
What was it like the first time you saw him, that he wasn't mobile, and you walk into this room and he's paralyzed? What happened? What was the exchange between you and Dan at that point?
I think both of us were still kind of not grasping the whole situation. I mean, I really didn't think that he was going to be bedridden the rest of his life or paralyzed. I mean, I kept thinking he's going to come out of this. He's a stud. Something's going to happen. He's going to be okay. And I think he felt the same way. But as time went on, we both realized that he was in big trouble. That was a big deal.
Were you there as he did make somewhat of a comeback and then began to train kids, and I think you promoted some kind of downhill racing and things like that. Were you involved in that, or tell us about how he did finally pull himself back up by his bootstraps, so to speak, and begin doing that?
No, he eventually got home, to Forest Hill, where him and Tracy had their home, and Kaylee, their daughter, and got settled in and got back to a semi-normal life. I mean, as normal as it can be for a person who's an elite athlete one day, and the next day he's, quadriplegic. So he got back to life, and then, he went through his ups and downs. He had some major depression, and like anyone would. But eventually he started doing fun things. We go jet skiing together. We had a wedge thing that we put on a jet ski for him, and he could pull the bars and do the throttle with the bars. And we had him out jet skiing, and he had that same spirit. It was still Danny, and we had a lot of fun. Then later he started promoting some bicycle races, some mountain bike races, and then of course then eventually he got into training and working with young kids is what he really enjoyed. So that was, I think, where his heart was at the end, is he really enjoyed working with the young kids and trying to make them safer and better riders at the same time.
Well, there's the old saying is the difference between heroes and legends are that legends live forever. And the legend of Danny Magoo will certainly live forever. I want to thank you, Bill, for taking the time to talk to us. And thank everyone at Vintage Motocross Q&A for tuning in. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but hopefully you enjoyed it. And thank you again, Bill. By the way, you have a lovely home, and I see a lot of tile inside there. Why is there so much tile in your home, Bill?
I'm a tile contractor now.
And what's the name of your company?
Forte Tile.
Here in Sacramento?
Yes.
How long have you been in business?
Almost 30 years.
Place is spectacular. It looks like Tuscany inside there. I bet you got some wine inside there.
Yeah, we do.
Maybe we should go inside and have a little
I
taste.
think you're right.
Bill, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
We'll see you next time on Vintage Motocross Q&A.